9 people walked into the mountains. None of them walked out. What the rescue teams found weeks later, buried in snow, was so disturbing that the Soviet government sealed the investigation files for 30 years. When they were finally opened, the official cause of death had been recorded as 4 words: an unknown, compelling force. This is that story. January 1959, the Soviet Union. A group of 10 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute in Sverdlovsk gathered their equipment and prepared for the trek of their lives. Their destination, Otorten Mountain, deep in the northern Ural range. Their leader was a 23-year-old engineering student named Igor Dyatlov. Experienced, meticulous, respected by everyone who knew him. The group had done this before. Most of them had completed difficult winter expeditions. This was graded Category 3, the highest difficulty classification in Soviet mountaineering. Dangerous for most people, manageable for them. They set off on January 23rd. There are photographs from the early days of the journey, the group laughing in the snow, setting up camp with practiced ease, Igor documenting everything in his journal. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back on January 28th. A joint condition had flared up. He said goodbye to his friends at a small settlement called Second Northern. It was the last time he would see any of them alive. He spent the next 54 years trying to understand what killed them. The remaining 9 pressed deeper into the mountains. Their diaries continued for several more days, routine entries, observations about the weather, small jokes between friends. On the evening of February 1st, they made camp on the exposed slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl. The indigenous Mansi people of the region had a name for that mountain, Dead Mountain. When the group failed to make contact on February 12th, no one panicked immediately. Delays happened on expeditions. But when another week passed in silence, the families raised the alarm. Search parties were sent out. What they found on February 26th would become one of the most studied, most debated, and most unsettling mysteries of the 20th century. The tent was discovered on the slope of Dead Mountain, half buried in drifted snow. It had been cut open, from the inside, not unzipped, cut, long, deliberate slashes through the fabric, as though someone needed to get out faster than any zip or button would allow. Inside, food still prepared, boots and coats left behind, personal belongings, cameras, journals, all untouched. Everything a person would need to survive a night at -30 degrees Celsius, all of it abandoned. Leading away from the tent, down the slope toward the tree line, rescuers found footprints. 9 sets. Some showed bare feet pressing into the snow, others showed only socks. 1 or 2 suggested a single boot, as if a shoe had been lost somewhere in the darkness. They had left in a hurry. They had left without their things, and they had not come back. At the edge of the forest, beneath a large Siberian cedar tree, rescuers found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Krivonishenko and Yuri Doroshenko. They were dressed in underwear, no shoes. The branches of the cedar above them had been broken at heights of up to 5 meters, broken from below, as though someone had climbed the tree frantically, desperately, looking for something. A small fire had been made nearby. It had gone out. 3 more bodies were found at intervals between the cedar and the tent. Igor Dyatlov, Zinaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin. They were positioned as though they had been crawling back toward camp, back toward the tent they had cut themselves out of. Their cause of death, hypothermia. The medical examiner found no injuries that would explain why 9 experienced hikers had abandoned their shelter in the middle of the night and walked to their deaths in the dark. The final 4 were not found until May. They had been buried under 4 meters of snow in a ravine, 75 meters from the cedar tree. And this is where the story changes. Nicolas Thibault-Brignol had a fractured skull, not a hairline crack, a massive blunt force fracture consistent with the kind of impact a car accident produces. Alexander Zolotaryov had multiple broken ribs on his right side. Lyudmila Dubinina had broken ribs on both sides. Her chest had been crushed inward from both directions simultaneously. The forensic examiner wrote that the force required to cause these injuries was enormous, extraordinary, the kind of force that would leave a person unable to move. But there was no external bruising, no damage to the skin, no marks that would explain how the injuries were made, as though something had applied catastrophic pressure and left no trace of itself on the surface. Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue, her eyes, the soft tissue of her lips and part of her face. Some of the group's clothing, when tested in a laboratory, showed elevated levels of radioactive contamination. No explanation was given for either of these findings. In the decades since 1959, researchers, scientists, journalists, and investigators have proposed many explanations. Here are the ones that have gained the most serious attention. Theory 1. The avalanche. In 2019, Russian prosecutors officially reopened the Dyatlov case. After a full year of investigation, they announced their conclusion. The group had been killed by a delayed slab avalanche. According to this theory, the tent had been pitched on an unstable layer of compressed snow. During the night, a slab shifted, striking the tent with enormous force. The hikers, disoriented and injured, cut their way out and fled downhill in panic. Unable to find their way back in the dark, they died from cold and from the injuries sustained in the initial collapse. This theory is taken seriously by a number of scientists. It explains the crushed ribs. It explains why the tent was cut from the inside. What it does not explain is the radioactive contamination. The missing soft tissue from Dubinina's face, or why experienced mountaineers apparently made no attempt to shelter together and conserve heat. The northern Urals in 1959 were not quiet territory. The Soviet military was conducting classified operations throughout the region, missile tests, atmospheric experiments, projects whose full nature was never disclosed. Several investigators have proposed that the Dyatlov group inadvertently wandered into a testing corridor, that what killed them was an experimental weapon or device, something that generated intense internal pressure without external impact, something that contaminated their clothing. This theory accounts for the unusual injuries, it accounts for the radiation, and it would explain why the Soviet government sealed the files for 30 years. What no one has been able to produce is a specific, confirmed test that corresponds to the time and location. Theory 3. Infrasound. Sound below the threshold of human hearing, infrasound, is known to have measurable effects on the human body. At certain frequencies, it can cause disorientation, nausea, panic, and a profound, irrational sense of dread. Under specific wind conditions, a mountain peak can generate exactly these frequencies. Some researchers believe that on the night of February 1st, the shape of Dead Mountain produced an infrasound wave that overwhelmed the group. That 9 rational, experienced people fled their tent in pure animal terror, convinced at a level beneath conscious thought that they had to escape immediately. This explains the panic, the bare feet, the abandoned equipment. It does not explain the crushed ribs, and it tells us nothing about a tongue, missing from a body recovered in the spring. The Mansi people had lived in the shadow of these mountains for generations. They considered certain peaks, including Dead Mountain, to be sacred ground. forbidden to outsiders. Soviet investigators considered early on whether the group had encountered a Mansi hunting party and whether a confrontation had turned violent. Nothing was found. No evidence of involvement. The Mansi were ruled out. What lingers, though, is this. The Mansi had always refused to name the hikers' destination, Otorten Mountain, in front of outsiders. When pressed, they would only say that the name translated roughly to, "Don't go there." The group had camped on Dead Mountain on their way to a peak whose name means, "Don't go there." Whether that is significant is a question each person has to answer for themselves. Yuri Yudin, the one who turned back, lived until 2013. He was 75 years old when he died. In interviews across the decades, he remained consistent. He did not believe the official explanations. He did not believe the avalanche theory. He believed something had been covered up, and he believed he would never know what. In 2019, when Russian authorities announced their final conclusion, many of the surviving families rejected it publicly. The Djatlow Foundation, an organization dedicated to the case, continues its own investigations to this day. The pass still bears Igor Dyatlow's name. There is a small memorial on the slope. I want to leave you with one last detail. When investigators recovered Igor Dyatlow's camera from the tent, they developed the film. The photographs show the group making camp on the evening of February 1st. Everything is normal. Everything is routine. The final frame on the roll was shot in near total darkness. It appears to have been taken quickly, as though someone picked up the camera without thinking, pointed it at the sky, and pressed the shutter. The image shows a light, round, bright against the black, rising above the ridge of the mountain. No one has ever been able to say what it was. The case was officially closed in 2019. The light in that photograph has no official explanation. Some things, it seems, even after 60 years, are still waiting to be understood. If this case intrigues you, there are more stories waiting on this channel. Make sure you're subscribed, because next week we're going somewhere even darker. I'll see you there.